So another random live, spontaneous and in the moment. I know a lot of you have asked for these to be scheduled, and maybe at some point that will happen, although it just seems to come up when the time seems to suit. So that's what we're up to. What's going on, Gus? Hi, Mallory. Good morning. How's everybody? Does anybody have any burning questions they'd like to ask? We'll just get right into that intuition. It's been popping a lot lately. There's been a real sense of time compression lately, and a kind of like the equivalent of falling in love with the moment in a simultaneous heartache or heartbreak. And that's led to a lot of conversations about the spontaneity of letting ourselves open up and letting ourselves become entirely vulnerable, which seems to be a really crucial aspect of this. Seems to give us direct access to something we could just call innocence again. It's been interesting. And I know there's a lot of energy that seems to be culminating before holidays for some people, and that is showing up a lot in sessions. So maybe you'll find some commonalities, something collective with some of the questions that you might have. I got a book from Kogan, which was really cool. He had sent it before he moved from Pacific Northwest to Puerto Rico. And upon opening the book, the very first quote was something along the lines of is the heart is set on the cherry blossoms of tomorrow. The storm at night blows them all away. And it really starts to speak to the impermanence of this existence. Even though there might be a lot of consistencies in how we live and how we feel and what seems to be a sense of the norm, the closer we get to the moment, the more we realize that this is quite spontaneous. That's pretty interesting too. Gus or Mallory, do you have any questions? You guys here just to hang out? Well, I guess we could chat a little bit. Gus is putting something together. Okay. Let me see. Here's a theme that's arisen. This could be something worth chewing on. It seems like when it comes to suffering or struggle or difficulty, we are alternating between these two potential aspects of what seems painful. There's the pain that we know, or the pain of the familiar, or the pain that's associated with comfort. And then there's the potential pain of what we don't know. If you find yourself sitting with a potential decision or fear about something that may arise in the future, ask yourself, am I engaging with the pain that I know, or am I engaging with the potential pain of what I don't? You might start to see how that particular bargain doesn't work out very well. That to sit with the pain that we know is 100% likelihood. But to step into something that's different, something that's spontaneous, new, and fresh, there's a likelihood that you don't discover pain there, even though it may seem scary, even though that sense of that intense sensation that may arise that we could call fear seems to accompany that experience, still doesn't mean anything. Is it really worth the bargain to sit with the pain of what we know versus the potential pain of what we don't? That's been a pretty big theme this week. When we engage in a lot more curiosity, there is a very strong sense of freedom because we're not really restricting ourselves to any particular quote unquote rules to the game. That's that's pretty juicy. The idea of allowing spontaneity in something immediate as often as possible, and usually that shows up in a space that we take for ourselves. Maybe take a look at all the distractions that seem to be taking place in your daily life. That might start to run into this sense of requirement where I have to do these things. I have to be engaged with these people. It has to look this particular way. And just see how much you can peel back on those distractions. You might start to find that life can be completely inundated with distraction. And what that basically means is nonstop stimulation, no time for just stillness. Stillness is usually found in an actual place of physical stillness. Most people become acquainted with it during meditation, and then something starts to shift where all of a sudden stillness seems to accompany us in this aspect of dynamic living with all the things we do. Stillness at work, stillness at family functions, stillness everywhere. Are you a personality? Does your identity kind of lean toward do, staying busy, busy, busy? If that's the case, there's probably an indication there that those particular doings are being utilized as a distraction to prevent you from sitting with something that's probably uncomfortable or something that's revealing nonetheless. It doesn't have to be uncomfortable, by the way. Something that you might find is the the amount of energy that the identity puts into avoiding pain and discomfort. It's actually inversely doing the same when it comes to pleasure and a sense of peace or well-being. People reject both pleasure and happiness at the same rate that they reject pain and suffering. This is not a one-sided thing, and that's just the nature of the identity, to create a fixation and to say it is this way. It is this way and only this way. That is the peace. One of the most powerful inquiry questions we can ask along this path is, what else is here? Is it just this way? Has it always been this way? Will it always continue to be this way? Just to break that open a little bit, just to invite more curiosity. And really getting into that fundamental aspect of inquiry. Inquiry just gets us engaged with curiosity. All right, I'm looking, Gus. Not really a question, but was getting blown away with the feeling that it's not my brain doing this. Kind of like the whole thing is the brain. That's really not a perceiver at all. There's a very strong notion that the brain almost acts like an antenna. That it's a series of all these neurons in a net, and maybe these thoughts are just energetic signatures that the brain is picking up on, and the interpretation of energetic signature shows up as thought. Yet the more time we spend watching thought, the more time that we allow ourselves to engage with thought from a seeming distance, just to point them out on a regular basis, to remain diligent in that way, the more we start to realize that they don't seem to have any origin at all. In fact, in the moment, if it's coming up as a memory, in the moment, if it's coming up as a reference to a past event, we can get a very strong notion that this is being kind of made up on, it's basically being made up on the spot. It's basically overlaying this experience right here, right now. We can't really pinpoint an origin to a thought. We cannot find where it began. We also cannot find where it ends. It seems to stem from emptiness and somehow return right into a state of emptiness. So maybe it's just energetic signature. And even then, that sounds like a separation or something in particular. It's just a way to express that this all seems to be energetic. A very visceral experience here is that this is all liquid color, and that shows up in the visual field sometimes. There's such a fluidity to everything that seems solid. I mean, it started with walls a long time ago. There was just an apparent ripple, very, very slow vibrational ripple to the walls. And it was very much like being on psychedelics. And then there were times driving in a car or traveling somewhere where watching the seeming landscape pass by it became really apparent that there's nothing quite solid out there. It's very fluid and liquid and almost constructing itself in perception as we come in contact with it. It's it's surreal. It just doesn't fit the frame of what the mind says. It can be very odd especially when it comes to the mind. The way that we see reality as a baseline when it comes to the mind, we have an entirely different experience with that. And it becomes really interesting. At least explore it in an honest way without denying the direct experience. That's what this really is. It's the mind somehow not only overlaying the experience, but rejecting and creating doubt in every single instant. It's just this reflection, this filter, this piece that's basically telling us how it is instead of us getting that direct taste. It really would be the equivalent of showing you a picture of a strawberry, telling you all about the strawberry, and then having an expectation that you can taste it. The only way to taste a strawberry and the only way to know how it tastes is to take a bite. It's that direct. It's really just about paying attention. And what that means is it's not a mental effort. What it seems to mean is bringing attention to the places that are seemingly avoided or moved against or covered up. And for modern human beings, that this seems to be why the pointing keeps going towards sensation. The body is quite often the most bypassed place of experience. Yet at the same time, we do have an awareness that we're always feeling something. There's never a point where we're not feeling. It's there, but it's being overshadowed. It's like a blind spot. And maybe this is why we use the term awakening, because it's like part of our perception, part of our attention is essentially sleeping. And now by engaging directly with it, immersing in that, it begins to wake up. All right, let's go. Let's pull one of these cards for Gus. All right, this one can be a strong fixation. This one will also come off like a koan. This one will say, there is no process. That is pointing to fixation on practice. And it's also pointing to a sense of anticipation or expectation for a future event, which is a displacement of this present moment. And I know it's really hard to glean this with the mind, but everything that needs to be engaged with is here, all awakening right here, right now. And I don't mean right here, right now in the future. I mean, literally, it's here now. And that's why the pointing sometimes comes from different teachers. I'm sure Adyashanti has said it. I know Angelo has brought it up. You're already awake. How could you not be awake? How could the attention not be there? We're not adding anything. We can't add anything. There is no decrease. There is no increase. That's what the Heart Sutra points to. And it's a very, very clear. When we get that direct experience, we realize that we are not adding anything. Awakening is not something that just shows up that wasn't here before. It's just a realization of, oh, this is it. This is as good as it gets, but not in perception of the mind. It is just this. So don't get hung up on a process. At the same time, the paradox arises. There is a process. At first, it seems to be, but then as we get closer, we realize that wasn't really what was happening. So it's also not a rejection of something that may seem like progress or a process. It's just a matter of recognizing that this isn't something that is coming to be. It is already done. And I know that can be confusing. And I know a lot of these pointings can be confusing and contradictory. And a lot of the questions that are received here are around those contradictions. Pay attention to that too, because if there's a fixation or a difficulty around these contradictions, that's an indication of something that wants to have a singular experience in something, one way or another, compared to something else. It's this, not this, is what the mind is saying. It's this, it's not this. The not is the reference. If it is this, then there is no not this. So if it feels like a contradiction and that feels uncomfortable, and you're attempting to compare two things, and one thing it is and one thing it is not, that's the bait. That's what it wants you to fall for. Ultimately, it seems like the experience of pain is the experience of pleasure. The experience of falling in love is the experience of heartbreak. It's a hunger, it's a longing that is never satisfied. Satisfaction in the way that we think of it in the mind does not exist. It is a never ending proposition. This is not about finding peace. This is not about ending suffering. Those are still objects, those are still constructs. This is just simply, really, really please hear this. This is just about engaging entirely with what is exactly as it is. No manipulation, no diversion, no changing, no running, no hiding. Can't really do that anyway. Just this as it is. That's the benefit of stillness. Because if we sit, we're not engaged in distraction, we're not engaged in becoming busy. We allow ourselves to really absorb what this is. And I think the first thing most of us find is something that appears to be a sensation in here. Start there. It's the perfect training ground for this. It's always going to be there anyway. You can't control these sensations, can't control these thoughts. Then we start to have a recognition that, man, we're quite helpless here. We can't do anything about this. Yeah, but that's actually okay. That's actually the first taste of freedom, even though it might feel absolutely terrifying. That's the tip of the spear of non-duality, so to speak, the paradox itself. It's the first recognition that nothing has any meaning. Life has no meaning. These sensations have no meaning. These relationships have no meaning. There is no person special anywhere. This is all just this. And that can be this, at first, this sense of nihilistic sadness that life has no meaning, but it also has this extreme joy and ecstatic energy behind it too. Life has no meaning. Look at the freedom there. If it doesn't have meaning, where are the restrictions? Where are the rules? And then some questions come in. A lot of people will have these lingering moral beliefs. Well, if we don't have rules, then people will start harming each other. It doesn't seem to be that way. It seems to be that way when people are highly identified. When people are really actually engaged, it's almost like we revert to our most innocent nature. And I'm saying revert. It's just, that's just who we are anyway. And it's like, if you ever watch little children interacting, like really young kids, they just will randomly hug each other. They're going to just share their snacks before any part of identity starts kicking in. That seems to be what we're all about. It's interesting. And I know that's not always the case with young kids, yet those moments are a really clear indication of innocence. It seems like we're just compassionate at our core. We just want to hug. We just want to enjoy whatever this is. Most of everything else. And we find ourselves in some kind of flow state where things are being done. Work is being done. This is pointing to that chop wood, carry water that you've probably heard. What do you do before awakening? Chop wood, carry water. What does one do after awakening? Chop wood, carry water. The difference is, before, in identification, there's this resistance. Oh, I don't want to go chop wood and I don't want to go grab that water. And then afterwards, we just find ourselves in the midst of being that. It's pretty interesting. All right. Mallory says her Christmas tree was waving. Yeah. I mean, if when we get present, the visual field, the sound field, sensational field, I mean, pretty much all of the five classic senses of the body, they become activated in a very vivid way. And if you allow yourself to get still in that way, notice the thoughts that want to come in and basically attempt to deny that experience and say, no, or snap out of it or go do something. You might find some compulsive thoughts start to kick in there. But it's pretty wild. I mean, there has not been a single human being I've met that has never had some level of this strangeness that we could call the fluidity of the visual field and what seems to be solid. Not one person, even people that aren't even interested in this path, upon really sitting and speaking, everyone has something, some experience, some taste of that strawberry. It's pretty interesting. Gus says, I was totally looking at something that was an edge, looking closer and closer, and it started getting very fuzzy and weird looking. Yeah. I mean, over and over and over, we could just engage with presence. If there's no thought overlaying the experience, it just reveals itself as it is. And it becomes stranger and stranger. Sometimes these things seemingly vanish. It seems like there's an empty space. Sometimes there's random appearances. It's very interesting. Patty says the letter M was waving. Well, hello, letter M. Mallory says she's been laughing for days and seeing there isn't a process. Yeah, there is not a process. It's spontaneous. At the same time, depending on meeting whoever where they are, sometimes it's useful to point, because really this is a systematic deconstructing of identity at first. That's what it seems to be. And in that space, it can seem like there's progress. It can seem like there's a process. So this is not about rejecting a process either. If there seems to be a process, then there seems to be a process. We continue investigating from there. But eventually, you might find that there's a fixation on it. It has to be a certain way. And it can become really subtle. This is what awakening is. There's like this idea. This is what it has to look like. I've heard all these stories. I've read all these books. I've listened to all these YouTube videos. It has to be this way. That right there is a fixation. And that is literally covering over what's happening now. And zooming into what seems to be relative individual experience. And if we look at relativity in a really honest way, it's just basically what seems to be a position of experience. And so even if two people are witnessing something the same, because of their relative position to that, their experience is actually going to be unique. And this gets pretty scientific as well if you get into the theory of relativity. In a relative way, in a world of form, relative experience is absolutely unique. But because the identity is a collective experience, it's something that we all share, pretty much a formulaic mechanism of control, a formulaic mechanism of protection. That particular piece is absolutely shared. So if you zoom into your individual experience, it cannot ever be compared to anybody else's awakening. So if you're hinging an expectation or you're looking for something based on somebody else's story, you are displacing something that's currently happening right here, right now. But if we zoom out, when we zoom way out and we look at this human experience as a whole, somehow these individual, absolutely unique aspects are exactly the same. Paradoxes everywhere. Hopefully that's clear. Let's see. It's nice to let the appearance appear. Yeah, I just watched an old video of my daughter in it as a 3-year-old. No self, beautiful. Yeah. And there's varying levels. Once kids begin to speak and be able to use language is a pretty strong indicator that identity has begun. It seems to coincide quite a bit with symbolic usage of language, because these thoughts that tend to show up as a narration are essentially the same kind of thoughts that construct identity. I saw a really interesting idea about meaning. Meaning isn't something we place on the meaningless cosmos. Meaning is in the intrinsic essence of the thing itself. The meaning of music is the music. Yeah, I mean, that's why the pointing points to that there is no meaning at all, because it's intrinsic. I mean, it's really the same thing. The meaning of the sound is the sound. Then the question comes, is the sound apart? Is it being broken apart? Because what you'll find is if we're still placing intrinsic meaning and it's something that seems to be separate or apart, that itself is the meaning. Really, it comes down to meaning being a form of reference, a form of separation. That's all. Meaning as a form of rejection of experience, as a rejection of what's present. I feel something like a fear or insecurity around owning my spiritual knowing. Like I know somewhere that I'm dreaming and I chose to do so, but I'm terrified of you telling me that this is bullshit. Well, this is bullshit. There is no choice. You didn't choose to dream. We didn't. Here's what happens in a lot of spiritual realms. We personify or anthropomorphize this, and really sit with anthropomorphization. What we're doing is essentially making it have meaning. It's like, oh, when we look at an animal that's just behaving in its own innocent way, and then we start putting words. Oh, he's thinking, oh, I should probably get this bone. No, your dog's probably not thinking that at all. Your dog's just going to the bone effortlessly. That's what I mean is we didn't make a choice before to come here as some kind of entity or some kind of identity that led to this body, and there's more identity, so on and so forth. That's all surrounding itself by identity. I mean, I can't say this for sure, but the notion is pretty clear. That itself is where the reference is being made. That itself is where the suffering seems to be occurring. The idea of that we chose this path, that imparts responsibility. Maybe that's not the case. Maybe it's just this way for no apparent reason. I highly recommend at least experimenting with that for a while. Maybe it's just this way and it's not connected to anything else. There is no cause to the effect. You will find a significant amount of freedom right there. But ultimately, this comes down to needing to have some sense of choice. What needs to have sense of choice? What needs to have a sense of freedom? And yeah, that's terrifying. Not being able to have actually any effect at all in this. Maybe in this world of form, it seems like we can have effect, but overall, when it comes to well-being, we cannot have effect. It just is. The only thing we can actually do is be engaged with that. And I think what you'll find is whatever you don't like, there's nothing bad about it at all. That's all just thought. I don't like this becomes an amplification of a sensation. But if the sensation has no meaning and you don't know what pain is, then where's the problem? It seems like the most fundamental way we can take this is to the Occam's razor of all experience. The most simplified we can allow this to be, the clearer it becomes. Because it is really that simple already. We feel, we perceive thought. Be engaged completely in that way. And you might start to find that there's nothing to struggle against. Yeah. Let's see. Language and identity. Patty has a question about language and identity. Yeah. So if you pay attention, this is really useful when it comes to coming in contact with our thoughts. The thoughts that tend to cause the most suffering or cause the most disassociation are going to be narrative. Some people hear a voice, or there's some sense of language and symbolic language and words with their thoughts. So there's a video that was put out quite a while ago about I don't even remember the title at the moment, but it's basically how do you think, and it comes into the place of most people don't even pay enough attention to see how thoughts arise. Some people, they don't visualize things. It doesn't show up as an image in the mind. Some people, if I were to bring up an apple, if I say, think about an apple, some people see an image of an apple. Some people see like a space with the words APPLE. And then other people, when they think about apple, they just hear the word apple in the mind. Either way, if you're having an engagement with symbolic language and you see the word or you hear the word, that's the particular type of thought that we want to pay attention to. The ones that are like basically speaking to ourselves or basically telling a story about the experience or telling a story about a past experience. Those particular things are very, very deeply tied into identity, because basically it's this aspect of narration that is basically it's basically gone overkill. It's all about the narration. But that still doesn't mean we reject story. It's just that we pay attention to how that narration arises. And you'll start to see that when people are hard on themselves, there's literal thoughts that come in as a voice or some kind of words like, you suck, you're not good enough. All these particular words. Sometimes they hear it in somebody else's voice, but the point is, those particular thoughts are the ones that tend to snag us the most. It's like someone, it's like having someone there that is telling us constantly, you can't live without me. And we allow ourselves to take a break from that particular voice, that particular narration. We could call it the voice of knowledge, the one that uses language. When it comes to seemingly random imagery and things along those lines, doesn't seem to be a problem, doesn't seem to lead to suffering for people. Sometimes if it's associated with a story and a narration and we're seeing things that happened to us in the past, that's a little bit different. But if we sit really still, sometimes imagery just arises spontaneously and it literally is connected to nothing and makes no sense. Those thoughts don't seem to be interfering with presence at all. It's almost like that gives us a clearer view of what thought really seems to be, just a seemingly randomly appearing energetic source. So that's a good question, though. The way we utilize language in our experience. One thing you'll probably find if you've ever interacted with people that are newly going through an awakening, their ability to describe anything or talk about the experience seems really limited because suddenly they're no longer attached to this aspect of language. It's just now, this experience. There's not even a translation of it. You might notice that too. All right. This one's good. This one says, experience lacks the noun. That one goes into language as well. The noun itself is it's an endpoint. It's a definition. It's final, right? This is a card. Instead of what it is doing, what is the dynamic aspect of this? This is not just a card. This is doing. This is communicating. So much more to that. What in your experience has been defined, what in your life has been set, and what is dynamic. If you find these aspects of life that seem to be set, which is going to include the story, and as mentioned before, we don't reject the story, we just approach it honestly so that we can investigate it. Really, the bait is it wants you to react. Ultimately, the identity is basically saying, whatever is here, do something other than that. So if it's frustration, oh, you got to find a way to get out of frustration. If it's presence, oh, you got to do something because that feels uncomfortable. All these particular leanings and movings away from what is making an appearance now. So the experience lacks the noun is basically pointing to the dynamic aspect of this impermanence. There's no nouns here, especially you. You cannot be a noun. The identity wants to be a noun. It wants to be well-defined. It wants to be done and solidified. It wants to be permanent. But if you really investigate that, you find that it is more dynamic. There's no noun there. It's a verb. It's in action. It's moving. It's dynamic. Let me pull another one since there were a bunch of other questions. This one keeps coming up. This is, I don't know why, but here you go. Say, feel, I don't know, I don't need to know. That is one of the most powerful addictions we have as human beings. In fact, the identity is predicated on knowledge and knowing, which is also a noun. It is a end place of experience. And we've seen this in history. We've seen this in science, even plenty, where something new arises in science and it's widely rejected because knowledge has a sense of permanence. You can't change this. That's heresy. This is perfect and placed and fixed. It's this addiction to something to be fixed when there's no such thing exists. Even the most long-lasting physical aspects of this universe don't last. Everything is losing electrons. Nothing remains permanent. Every piece of lead that you've ever interacted with was likely a piece of uranium at one point in time. This is just the nature of this universe. This is the nature of, we could even get into entropy and the science of thermodynamics. It's pointing the same direction. It's a constant shift. Nothing remains the same. That's why it's so good to express or experience here, Now, going back to sensations, whatever is being felt, these primary beliefs that we call emotions, this is sadness, this is anxiety, so on and so forth. That's a belief because it's a fixed experience with a group of sensations without going further and closer to the direct experience and seeing what's there. This sensation is uncomfortable. That's where we stop. This is sadness. That's where we stop. And that's the experience. And then that might trigger more thoughts and that overlays the entire thing. But what if you go a little bit deeper? You might start to have a sense of this actually seems spontaneous. How could I call this anything? Did these sensations ever exist in this way before? Those types of curiosity or that type of curiosity, those types of questions lead us somewhere. This is a training ground. It's already here. Engage with the sensational space, and it will show you everything about this universe. It is basically the universe inside in a way that works exactly the same way as the rest of reality. Not fixed, that's for sure. But if we do have a sense that something is fixed, that will always be the experience. But what's even stranger is while we're in the midst of these sensations, we get a notion that the thought itself about sadness is attempting to orient to something out here and then overlaying a sensation that actually doesn't have any meaning at all. It could literally be the same sensation of absolute pleasure, but because of the overlay, we just buy into the filtration. It's like that. And that's where we can start asking ourselves even more questions in the paradoxical place. What about the sensation is not sadness? What about the sensation isn't painful? And then it begins to become really clear. Oh, it's somehow a combination of both, or somehow neither of those. It's a pretty powerful place to engage. All right. Does anybody have any other questions? Well, I know we're heading into the holiday. This is probably the last live I'll do before the holiday. If you celebrate, Merry Christmas. Um, so grateful for everyone. Thank you for joining me on these. I love the curiosity. I love the questions. I love the opportunity. Thank you all for the opportunity just to engage in this energy that I could just refer to as intuition. It feels, man, hopefully you can share that with me, but it just feels good. It just feels effortless and easy and so nice. And I'm really so grateful for everybody for just giving me the opportunity to play with this creativity and this sense of expression. It's just yeah, so good. So anyway, Merry Christmas, have a great holiday, and I guess I'll speak with everyone later. Oh, by the way, tomorrow there is a premiere of. It's actually just a short video. I was kind of playing with the trailer, but it actually turned out pretty well. So it'll premiere tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Mountain Time, and you can always check that one out. But got to play with some editing and things like that, which was kind of fun. So check it out. All right, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and be cozy and warm and immerse yourselves in love and or whatever is showing up. Just be immersed. Just get all the way into it. And I will talk to you soon. Bye.